And we are live. Let me just check over here, make sure that everything is good. Just giving a few minutes, just making sure that everything is all good. All right. So we are here on day 3 of 31 days of inspiration, motivation, lupus awareness, and the inspiration is coming from the book entitled Fragrance After Rain by Dr. Jaiya John. So today's topic is a different kind of story, and it comes from page 226. So like I've been doing over the last few days, I'll read the passage from the book, and if you have the book, you can go ahead and read it along with me, or I would strongly recommend that you get this book because it is such an amazing book. It's so inspirational, and it was really interesting that as I each day that I read certain passages, it kind of, for me, it turned into more like a journal, almost like journaling prompts. So that's why I've been picking different passages from the Bible, not the Bible, from this book to share with you in relation to this Lupus Awareness Month, right? Because and it doesn't necessarily apply only to Lupus Awareness Month. It's can be applied to life in general, right? So this particular um, discussion today comes from page 226, and I'm entitling today A Different Kind of Story. So it says, when you are in pain, even beauty can hurt. You may resent those who exude beauty, who speak and write of beauty, who offer kindness on the side of the road, and who want to pour compassion in your cup. When you are in pain, you can be lost in a story of suffering that quickly comes to define you. Anything or anyone who is a reflection of a different kind of story becomes a threat to the tight grip you have on your idea of who you are and what the world is. When you feel this angry, desperate surging in you, see if you can let it sweep you into a tide pool of calmer water. Breathe, hold your heart. Acknowledge that at this time, beauty is hard for you to bear. In your acknowledgement lives a medicine, a seed of surrender to the truth of your immediate season. This surrender is, all by itself, a healing ground, a beginning of a journey through which you become the beauty others cannot yet bear. And this little part was a little bit longer than the last few days, but I couldn't like take any particular piece out. So I'm going to kind of break it down into, I'm going to kind of dissect this passage a little bit, right? But when I first read this, and for those of you who are watching, feel free to say hi. And I love the interaction. So post your comments, your questions. I love interacting with people who are watching, right? So when I first read this passage, the part that stood up to me was, where is it? When you are in pain, you can be lost in a story of suffering that quickly comes to define you. So I'm going to address that part first, because one of the things that and this is, I'm not attacking anyone, but one of the things I've noticed with when it comes to anyone who's been diagnosed with lupus. Hi, Kathleen. It's good to see you. When it comes to anyone who's been diagnosed with, well, I should say anyone, a lot of people who've been diagnosed with lupus tend to find their identity in the illness or in the diagnosis. And they've I've seen this happen time and time again with several autoimmune patients or lupus patients where they've spent so long. It's been so many years since they've been diagnosed, or maybe it's not even that long, but they become almost attached to the fact that they've been diagnosed with this particular illness, and they can't see themselves outside of the illness itself or outside of the diagnosis. So they've made an attachment with the illness, and the illness becomes part of their identity. But one of the things I would like strongly encourage you is to kind of learn to break that attachment, because you're not your diagnosis, you're not the illness. The illness is simply a part of who you are at this time. And I think that's where a lot of people tend to get confused in holding on to that attachment, right? And I completely understand that if you're not at that place where you're ready to release the attachment, it's perfectly okay. I'm speaking from what I've seen, I'm speaking for what I've experienced, because one of the things that I have said is that this is coming from a place of I've been there, right? I am not speaking to you of uh, from a place of someone who's never been diagnosed with lupus, who has no clue what lupus is. I was diagnosed back in, I think, 2012. So this is, gosh, it's about 10 years. Might have been a little bit earlier. And along prior to that, I've received several other diagnoses. So lupus was not the only one, but it was the one that kind of made sense as to why all of the other diagnoses would had been made. So this is a journey that I've been on myself, and it's something that I've gotten lots of experience in, and so I'm speaking from that place. So the whole idea of the attachment, when you were someone else for many years, and then you receive this diagnosis, you many people, myself included, find it really hard to move past the illness, past the diagnosis, and see anything in their future separate and apart from that diagnosis, right? And I think that's where the mud or the muddle tends to occur, right? So I'm here to encourage you that you can move past the identity that you've now forged with the diagnosis, because you are not your diagnosis. You are somebody completely separate. And one of the things I also like to encourage you is, and this just kind of popped in, so I'm going to mention it, changing the way you speak about yourself relating to the diagnosis. Because I've heard a lot of people, and I have done it myself, say I have a certain illness, right? For example, I have lupus, or I have this. And one of the things that I found that worked for me, and I encourage anyone whenever I hear people speaking or taking ownership of a particular diagnosis, a particular illness that they've been diagnosed with, I encourage them to change the words around it and say, I've been diagnosed with this particular condition, not I have. Because when you say I have, you kind of take ownership of it. And then your body also begins to take ownership, saying, oh, you have this thing, you want this thing, let me give you more of what this thing that you want. And it might sound strange, but your body listens to you. Yesterday, that's one of the things I talked about is, when your body is in pain, listen to your body, because your body is talking to you. But your body also listens to the words that you utter to yourself. So saying I have a certain illness, you're basically kind of encouraging your body to give you more of what you're saying you have. When you say you've been diagnosed with, there's no ownership in that. So that's one of the things I encourage people, is to change the words that you're using around any particular illness that you've been diagnosed with, whether it be lupus or something else, right? Don't take ownership of it, but change the conversations that you have about that particular diagnosis, and use the terms diagnosis rather than, you've been diagnosed with, rather than have. Okay, I hope that made sense. So that particular part, identifying or allowing a particular illness or diagnosis to define who you are, because you are not the diagnosis, you are not the illness. The illness is just something that you are experiencing at that particular time of your life. And we mentioned this story here for a moment. I had a doctor at one time that said to me, actually, he was the doctor that discovered the diagnosis of lupus. The first time he didn't believe it, so he sent me off to get some more extensive testing done. Then it came back confirming that lupus was active. So he looked at me, he said, these are the medications that you're going to be taking, and you're going to be taking them for the rest of your life. Then the next thing was lupus is incurable, and you're going to have it for the rest of your life, and it could possibly kill you. And it was when he uttered those words, I looked at him and I said, you know what? The only person who has the end of my life's date is God himself. You're not God. And nobody speaks negativity over my life, especially that kind of negativity. No kind of negativity. And I fired him. I left. Because if I'm with a doctor who sees no hope for me whatsoever, then that's not the doctor that I want to be with. I need a doctor who's going to see the possibility that I could get rid of this. Even though they're still preach to this day that there is no cure, I'm sitting proof here that you can get a result where it's showing absolutely no lupus in your body. And I've baffled a couple of doctors, including my current doctor. So though it's not only the conversation that you have with yourself, it's also the conversations that you allow other people to have or speak over you. All right. So you've got to be very careful about the people that we surround ourselves with, especially when you're dealing with any kind of illness, especially a chronic illness. Right. So I just wanted to share that. This other part, when you're in pain, even beauty can hurt, and you may resent those who exude beauty, who speak and write of beauty, who offer kindness on the side of the road, and who want to pour compassion in your cup. This part here really hit me, especially a few years back when I started my Facebook group that was all about beating lupus the natural way. And I got a lot of, for lack of a better word, a lot of flack about it, because there were people in there who had joined who were not quite ready to hear or to have that conversation, that lupus does not have to be a life sentence, right? They weren't not quite ready to hear the conversation that, yes, there might be a cure for lupus. They might not necessarily be saying it out there, and it might not necessarily look like what other people say it should look like. And I realized that I don't think people really hated me, but I realized that I needed to kind of back off in the way, because admittedly, I might have been coming off a little strong. Looking back, I can see that. And it's because when you find things that work for you, and you know that so many people out there are suffering with the same thing that you've been battling for years, and you want to share, you don't even think about, well, who is going to get upset about me sharing this stuff. You just want to share, right? But not everybody that I was trying to share with were ready to hear it, right? And I had to step back and realize that not everyone was ready to have that conversation, and not everybody was ready to get on their path for healing. Because here's the other thing, and I'm going to be a little bit ahead of myself by sharing this part, because I did have notes written down. Thing is, everybody's journey, and this is something that I had to acknowledge for myself, everybody's journey is different, and not everybody is going to go on the healing path at the same pace or doing the same things as I was. And that was something that I really had to sit down and kind of swallow, because I was so excited about sharing this stuff with people, and I really had to take a step back and say, um, it wasn't about me. Yes, I was excited about sharing, but at the same time, I had to realize that not everybody, that every lupus patient was different. And although some people acknowledged that they wanted to start the healing journey, they weren't quite ready to start the healing journey. Which brings me to another question is, um, and I'm just throwing this out there, not necessarily as a judgment or anything. It's just a couple questions that I like for lupus patients to think about when they say they're not quite ready to start the healing journey. Is what are you what do you stand to lose by actually healing yourself of this particular condition? What do you stand to gain from healing, right? And what I found is, when it comes to losing, what do you stand to lose? A lot of people stand to lose the sympathy and that sort of thing surrounding the fact that they have a chronic condition, right? Because you do get a lot of sympathy from people, um, and I understand that that's something that a lot of people kind of feed off of. When it For me, it was one of those things that, I don't want you to say, oh, I am so sorry that you're going through this. I really got to a place where I was so tired and I was in so much pain and I was just over it, and I said, enough is enough. I need to get rid of this thing, right? That's the place that I was in. It wasn't anything about, I didn't want the sympathy. Because here's another thing that a lot of lupus patients deal with, is the you don't look sick. A lot of people with lupus don't manifest anything on the outside. Most of what's happening with them happens on the inside. I was just one of those people who ended up having outward manifestations for quite a while, especially on my skin. But even after some time, I managed that kind of disappeared, and most of it was happening on internally. So most of what I did was work on the internal side. But I would hear that a lot. But you don't look sick, and I know a lot of lupus patients go through that. You don't look sick, right? And that is something, I think, one of the things with lupus, and one of the things with lupus patients is, when they're not quite ready to kind of start the healing journey, because they have so many questions relating to how other people even view them with the diagnosis already. A lot of people question whether they actually have the condition, because of the fact that they don't necessarily look like they have a condition. Because, with certain illnesses, chances are you lose your hair, um, you lose a ton of weight, or maybe you gain a ton of weight. But there's usually some kind of outward manifestation, right? And with lupus, there isn't. It's just so different with each individual lupus patient. With me, I did end up losing. I lost some hair, but it was kind of weird where it happened. It was like in the back of my head, and I would pull my hair back in a ponytail a lot. So nobody really knew that I was losing my hair, except for my doctor, who I did tell, and then they prescribed something called Rogaine, which I never used. But I managed to grow my hair back, and that now there are questions, and yeah, I'm not gonna bring that up. But there've been a lot of questions recently about why my head is shaved. But the reason is, let me clarify it, is because I did a lot of research. I did a lot of a fundraiser for childhood cancer research. And after I'd managed to grow my hair out, then I shaved my head and donated the money. So that's why I have kept a clean shaven head for the last 3 years. Has nothing to do with lupus or anything. But I know a lot of lupus patients that do battle from alopecia. That was one of the diagnoses I received. but I've managed to kind of reverse that. So unless you have some of these outward manifestations, and the thing is, even with alopecia, a lot of people don't realize that these people are battling alopecia with the lupus because a lot of them wear wigs and they look so natural. So the questions I usually ask when people are not quite ready to start the healing journey is, well, what are you afraid of losing? But what do you stand to gain as well when you start this healing journey, right? Because I know with lupus, there's, and like, I can only speak from personal experience. With lupus, I got to a point where I was immobile, right? I was using a cane, I was using a walker. If I went grocery shopping, I was using one of those motorized chairs. So I did stand to gain from healing my ability to walk again, right? Being pain free, all of those things. Those are things I stood to gain. Um, I stood to gain the fact that I didn't have all of this stuff happening on on my face. People didn't look at me funny. Um, I mean, now they still do anyway, but that's beside the point. That's a whole other discussion. But you have to ask yourself those questions like, what do you stand to lose? What do you stand to gain when you really start on the healing journey? And you have to make the acknowledgement that you're really not ready to start the healing journey, because that in itself is also healing, right? And I know it sounds weird, but just acknowledging that you're not quite ready to start on your healing journey is healing in itself, right? And whenever you are ready, then things will kind of go on the course that they're meant to go on, right? So I mentioned every lupus patient is different. The whole idea that you don't look sick for many is an issue. I'm just looking at my notes. Not everybody's path is going to take the same quote unquote path, go in the same direction. It's not going to engage the same modalities. It's not even going to happen at the same speed. And that is something that I had to realize, because I was so gung ho about engaging with people on my page and tell them, listen, this is what you can do, da 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 da, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen, without realizing that not everybody's there yet. Not everybody is where I was at that time. And even now, a lot of people are still not quite ready yet. So readiness is going to come at different paces, and that's one of the things I had to be prepared for. So this passage really hit me. This was like a major slap in the face when I was I know that's probably not the right way to put it, but that's what it was feeling like, because I could see myself in this passage. So the thing is, anything, and I'm reading here, anything or anyone who is a reflection of a different kind of story becomes a threat to the tight grip you have on your idea of who you are and what the world is. So the whole idea of who you are at the time of the diagnosis or since the diagnosis, be encouraged that you are not your diagnosis, right? You are not your diagnosis, and you can move beyond. You can move beyond that. Even as you heal, as you begin to engage with the diagnosis in ways of healing rather than in ways of suppression, right? Because that's one of the things I think we've been taught with lupus, is that we're supposed to suppress the medication that we're given is meant to suppress the immune system rather than heal the immune system. So when we move from a place of suppression to a place of healing, then we can kind of, as this says, release that grip that we have on who we are supposed to be as far as the diagnosis is concerned, because we are so much more than the diagnosis. We go on to this other part: a seed of surrender to the truth of your immediate season. So when you admit that, okay, I'm not quite ready to heal, that in itself right there is a seed for healing, right? But one of the things I would like to encourage is, don't get lost in the whole idea of the diagnosis that you've been given. When you receive the diagnosis and you become identified with it, you start to lose who you really are, as a person, as a human being, as a spiritual being. And the diagnosis is just a small piece of you at that point, right? You are so much bigger than that diagnosis. So my encouragement to you is start to kind of loosen the grip on the identification with the diagnosis, right? And that is when the healing really can start to happen. And there's so many different, I have shared about different modalities that I've worked with. Some of them seem kind of out there, and they might be. They've worked for me. I've had, other people contact me and try different things, and they seem to be on the healing journey themselves. If there's any kind of question that you might have relating to, well, Gina, I mean, you look amazing. How did you get from point A to point B? Yesterday I talked about that. It was not a straight line. Okay. And I would encourage you to go back and listen to yesterday's, because it was not a straight line. It was, I mentioned, it was kind of, zigzag, up and down, really highs, lots of lows, maybe a straight line, or maybe a line going up, ascending, and then maybe a spiral. So the healing journey is not a pretty thing. And that's what I talked about yesterday. The healing journey is not pretty. But when you get to the place where you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not even paying attention to this diagnosis anymore. Healing, it's beautiful. Yes, you might still wake up in pain some mornings, but you wake up with so much more joy than you do, than this connection with the illness that you've been diagnosed with. I hope this has come across as, encouragement. It's not supposed to be. I'm trying to share that the healing can actually take place, regardless of the stories that you've been hearing, regardless of the story that you've been telling yourself. Healing can take place, and it'll come at a time whenever you are ready. And you can start to actually tell yourself a different kind of story that does not necessarily involve your diagnosis. If there's any questions at all, because I know I did a lot of talking, and some of it were things that I didn't even have in my notes and just came out. But if there's any kind of concerns, any kind of questions, feel free to pop them into the comment section. If you have any questions about, or about different processes that I might have worked with, different modalities that I might have worked with, feel free to shoot me an email, send me a direct message. You can even do a video chat with me. You can go to my Facebook page, which is, if you just type in Beating Lupus the Natural Way, or just type in my name on Facebook, it'll come up, and you'll be able to book an appointment. It's like a 30-minute free consultation, and we can sit down and we can discuss, some of the modalities that I work with, some of the modalities that I personally use, that are open to you working with, if you want to, try them out. I have, thank you. Yes, it is encouraging. My diagnosis is diabetes and some complications. Yes. So what the messages that I'm bringing are not just for, lupus itself. These can be for anyone, regardless of the diagnosis that you receive, right? So even though I'm doing it during Lupus Awareness Month, it is not just for people who have been diagnosed with lupus or autoimmune condition, and diabetes is an autoimmune condition, right? So if you have any kind of questions, or if you'd like to book a consult, just simply go to the lupus page. If you type in Beating Lupus the Natural Way, or facebook.com / Beating Lupus the Natural Way, the page will come up, but it will have my name now, and it will say complementary therapist practitioner, because I've changed the official name to kind of move away from just the lupus patients. But autoimmunity can occur with lupus, with Sjogren's. There's so many different aspects to it, and I've had a lot of people come to me who were not necessarily diagnosed with lupus, but might have been diagnosed with, I know someone who came to me recently was actually someone who was trying to lose weight, um, and are having quite a few issues. And a few people came to me trying to become a vegan because I'm a vegan nutritionist. So I hold a lot of different certifications. So it's not just necessarily coming to me dealing with a lupus diagnosis or some kind of autoimmune condition diagnosis. All right. So that is available to you. Let me tell you what is coming up tomorrow. And again, the book that I'm sharing from is Fragrance After Rain by Dr. Jaiya John. And if you have not yet, if you don't have that book, I strongly encourage you to get it. Even if you just use it as a journal, because that's what I do. I kind of, you know, fan the pages, and then I open the book up, point a finger, and that's my passage for today, because every single passage in there is so different. These are all inspired thoughts by Dr. Jaiya John. Very, very good. All right, so tomorrow is day 4, and this starts out on page 69. And let me tell you what that starts, because what I have written down is I wrote down butt naked, but it starts out that way. A butt naked 1-year-old is running wild through a room full of human rules, etc., etc. So tomorrow we're going to talk about that, right? What's up with this butt naked 1-year-old running around this room, and what does that have to do with dealing with lupus or autoimmunity or just a human in general, right? So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So again, my encouragement is, let's start writing a different story around our diagnosis. Let's start to release our attachment to this whole idea of identifying with a diagnosis, because we are not the diagnosis. We are not the illness. We are much more than that. All right. I will see you all tomorrow around the same time. Any questions, again, please post them in the comments. And thank you so much for spending, how much is this? About 30 minutes? Yeah, I kind of want them to be around 30 minutes at a time. All right. So see you all tomorrow.